All right, so I usually preface this talk by briefly mentioning that the title is a bit truthful, although I wish it weren't so. I call this the not so quick guide to APA style, and that's because it's a lot of information to condense in a short amount of time. So it may end up being a little bit long at some points, or stop me if I'm going too quick, because I kind of have to get through a lot really quickly. But we'll get there. Starting off, I think it's good to give a brief overview so you know when to use this style and what disciplines and what times are appropriate for it. It's from the American Psychological Association, so that means School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, SOBL stuff, tends to use APA. Psychology, social work, criminal justice, all that kind of good stuff. It's also applicable in the kind of more directly science fields like biology or chemistry, but it's really in this social science field that they get their roots from. Because it's such a research and science-driven field, that means that the currency of your information and the source of your information are actually like super premium. If you're in a history class, it's going to be the same information about the 1800s in the 90s as it was during the 2000s. That information doesn't quite change. In the social sciences and in sciences in general, information is constantly being updated. So the criminal justice statistics from 1995 will be crazy different than 2005, will be crazy different than 2015. So the recency of your information is critical in APA, as well as where it's from in terms of the author and the organizations, like it is in other citation styles. There are two key components to APA, and that is the citing to avoid plagiarism, to get information in your paper, and the kind of rough format, title page, type stuff that makes the paper look more like one cohesive whole and keeps some consistency in the discipline. So before we get into like the super nitty-gritty of what the APA presentation has to give here, there's a little bit of a shortcut that we like to show people, and that is if you just go to Microsoft Word, and I believe if you do this in Google Docs, it also yields pretty positive results. But when you get to like the Make a New Document page, you have a few options in front of you. Typically, you would click on this blank one right at the front, but if you go up here and just hit APA, you get some good resources. This first one actually gives you a blank template. It gives you little text boxes, and it gives you little notes about what you should be adding in each of those sections. And this is great. This is super helpful, but you need to still know what you're doing to use it correctly, because this plans for every weird thing you could possibly be doing. So all the way at the bottom, it's got like tables and charts and graphs and like footnotes, ways to present information that not every paper of yours is going to have. So knowing APA and using this template wisely can help you kind of trim down those extra pieces you know you don't need. But I think it's super helpful, especially for first-time students or freshmen or people who are just using APA for the first time, because there's all sorts of little weird formatting things that, like, unless you know how to navigate the specific format thing to get all up in the settings and all there, it's tough to find exactly what you need to do, where you need to do, and this does it for you. So I think that's a good kind of introduction to how to use the APA template. As you go and do that template, you'll notice that there's a title page, which is the very first page, the abstract immediately following it, the body of your paper, whether it's 2 pages or 20, and then you get a references page all the way at the end. Those are the most typical APA pages that you'll be dealing with. Again, if you have tables or charts and graphs in kind of more concrete, like upper level sciences, you can get more guidance there from some of the citation style books or your professors. While you're doing all of these pages, the title page, abstract, body, and references, there's some rough format you need to follow. You need a serifed typeface at size 12. Most professors will prefer Times New Roman, but technically APA only requires anything with a little curly foot, a little serif on the typeface. So here's like the example right here. You see the little curls off the edge on the first one. Anything in size 12. You also want to double space all of the pages. That means like exactly double spacing, not like 2.1 spacing or some weird 1.1 inch margins to kind of squeeze some extra length. You're not going to fool anybody, least of all me. And on the very top of the page, you'll have a running head. And this, if you're more familiar with MLA style, would be like your page number and your last name. This will be your page number and the title of your paper in all capital letters. And you'll see an example. You'll see at the very top, running head, colon, title in all capital letters. The first page is the only place you'll have this phrase running head. On the rest of the pages, you need to delete the phrase and just have the title in all capital letters. That's one of those weird Microsoft Word or Google Docs formatting things that you need to find the exact button to do that the template does for you. So I think that's a neat little trick. The title page in general, there are 3 important things to note. There's that running head we talked about. The second one is that in the middle of the page that is centered and roughly centered up and down, you need to have a few bits of information. First is the title of the work, what you've chosen to call it. Most professors would prefer an interesting or fitting title rather than like Essay 5 or Response Paper 2 or something weird like that. Your name goes after that, however you choose to be referred to in the paper. If it's your full name and middle initial, whatever it is, whatever you want. And the next was the institution, so Stockton University is the third line. You'll then skip to the bottom of the page and put an author note. If you're familiar with MLA style, there's some pieces of information missing, like professor name or like the date it was written or stuff like that. This author note is where you chunk the rest of it together. It's one single sentence that says why the paper was written. And in more scientific endeavors or more hard research papers you'd be writing, this would be a sentence like, this paper was prepared with funding from the FDA to investigate this drug trial or something. For the college level, especially undergraduate, it's a bit more simple. It's a bit more practice. So your sentence right there will say, almost exactly, this paper was prepared for, name of the course, taught by, name of the professor. And if you wanted to add in spring 2018 or in fall 2019, whatever it is, afterwards you can. But really, you're looking for the name of the course, the name of the professor, in a sentence, under the phrase author note. And we'll see an example here. We have the title at the very top, my name right in the middle there, Stockton University, and then all the way at the bottom, author note, the paper was prepared for, and then I wrote it for Stockton University Writing Center, and that's the coordinator. All right. So we'll move on to the next page of the paper. And this, even though it comes second, should really be one of the last things you write. An abstract is a brief little section before I get to your paper that summarizes the whole thing. Every piece of broad information in your paper should be in the abstract too. So it's not adding to the paper in terms of length or content, it's summarizing what's already there. And it's impossible to write that before you've written the paper because you don't know what you've actually written yet. Some style guides differ over what precisely to do in this section in terms of length. Some recommend 300 words, some say 250, some say under 400. There's some kind of gray area in terms of the exact wording. So long as you have roughly around, I wrote here 150 to 250, but around 300-ish words summarizing your main ideas, you're right in the butter zone. Things to look out for. I think if you are using any statistics or any quotes in the abstract, do not. It's not that specific. You're going too in-depth into one topic. You want to keep it broad. And if you're kind of meandering or bringing up some of your arguments and fleshing that in depth, trim it back. This is really, really broad. One way that I think is helpful to write the abstract is once your paper's written, go through every one of your paragraphs and try and summarize your paragraph in one single sentence. For your intro, that's easy. It's your thesis. That makes sense, because that's what you're building to in the intro. Every paragraph afterwards, though, try and get it to one single sentence, and then your abstract is those sentences, one after another, sort of. That's like a good start. It's a skeletal structure to build on. You can also, in this section, use kind of self-reflective language or self-reflexive, and that is, this paper examines, or in this paper, the research shows that. And in the rest of your paper, this would not be the right style. You would not want to reference the fact that you're in a paper while in the paper. But the abstract, it's a strong choice to do so. The real purpose of the abstract is to show whoever is going to be reading your paper that it is worth reading, that it has to do with what they're trying to research. So while you guys are doing your research, looking for articles to read or looking for books that are going to fit your topic, it would be crazy to read 100 pages of an article and realize, wow, this is entirely separate from whatever my topic is and has no bearing on what information I'm going to use. I've wasted 100 pages worth of reading. The abstract prevents that. You read the abstract, you go, wow, this is for me, wow, this isn't for me, and you choose accordingly. So you writing the abstract is practicing that same discipline helpful tool. Any questions on the abstract? I know it's a bit of a weird concept, especially if you've never used APA before. I think people tend to get intimidated by them. I think that people would rather beg their professor not to write one or kind of ignore or not know about them. But it's really it's a quick paragraph, and it's really about practicing that APA style. You're skipping the abstract as you're writing the paper because you want to wait till the end to do it. We're in the body of the paper. Here's where you'll spend most of your time writing. This is the paper itself, the bulk. Before you start here, I think it's important to get a big picture in mind and get your structure and do a couple pre-steps first. One of which I think is always helpful is to start an outline. Figure out what order your paragraphs are going to go in and why they're going in that order. If you have 3 supporting pieces of evidence in your paper, do you want to do them in what order you're putting them, and is it one piece of evidence, example, one piece of evidence, example, evidence, example? Or are you going to go evidence, 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 example, example, example? Different structures like that can change how your paper presents itself. And some strategies are stronger than others, and some are more important sometimes, and some are different, applied differently. But things to keep in mind is that you want to do this pre-step, because when students come to the Writing Center, one of the biggest things they'll ask us is if it flows, or does it sound right? This structure is when it doesn't. If the paragraphs are in some weird order that doesn't make sense, or like you're really doing well building an idea, and then you kind of get off topic with one paragraph, and then you get back to it, that's what makes it feel choppy. This is also important for you to look at the assignment sheet and see what the paper's asking of you. If you're writing a 10-page paper, you're going to have to build a very different outline if it's a 1-page paper. If it's 50 pages versus 5 pages, those length requirements help you narrow down and get more specific or get more broad in certain sections. All things to pay attention to before you start writing the actual paper. Also important to do before you actually write the paper is to figure out what to write about. Right? That's the easy, hard step. You got to get your thesis, and you got to build your idea, and finding sources is one of the first and most important steps of that. The research before you do a paper is integral to get your head straight and really figure out what it is you're trying to argue or what point you're trying to make. This, again, for APA is going to matter so much more and so much more in depth than I think other disciplines kind of get with it. You want to find recent information. Within the last 5 years is usually best. If you're writing about a topic that doesn't have information in the last 5 years or you can't find anything, I'd be surprised, because new research is always being done in the sciences. You want to find stuff that's relevant to your topic, read the abstracts, pay attention. You want to find stuff that is peer-reviewed if you can. And the library database has search functions that we can go through in a second to see where peer-reviewed articles are. But it just means that when this person submitted their paper and was editing it, they had some scholar in the field who's on the same level as them double-check their work. Or the publication it was submitted to had some peer-reviewing process before it was submitted. So it's a way for these academic journals to double-check themselves. Those are strong sources because we know they've been vetted. And as I was saying, academic journals or scholarly sources are usually premium. That's not to say that internet sources or books are less valuable. In fact, I think books and internet sources can both be hugely helpful in any kind of paper you're writing. But academic journals tend to be the most reputable, and they tend to be the most specific. And for this, you'll need specific information. Pay attention to bias and pay attention to information presented in ways that may not be totally honest or may not be totally fair. Every person has bias. Every person has an idea they want to portray. And if your article or your website or your book is taking one side of something over the other, or is kind of leaning in one direction, you want to be conscious of that as the reader and as the researcher. So with all that, we'll go to the Stockton Library database page. So in the Richard E. Bjork tab, this searches all the databases all at once. So in the past, you had to kind of select which database to go through, and some were about science, or some were about health, some were about history. This does all of it once, and I think it's much more convenient, and it's much more similar to the kind of Google type searching that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. But in here, let's do this. Let's do criminal justice and overpopulation. Oop. And as we see, the quotes and the words I've used there are important. This is bringing up every article that has the phrase criminal justice and the phrase overpopulation with this word in the middle. This is called Boolean searching. And it's a way for you to narrow down your search in a really specific and really detailed way. Because it lets you omit or add things at your choice rather than some weird computer programs. If I want to talk about criminal justice in America, and I keep getting articles about like British criminal justice systems, or maybe criminal justice systems in Canada, or we'll say South America, I can add America in quotes afterwards. Now this may give me South America or North America, or I may just say the word America in it somewhere. It may be about like Irish statistics, but they said the word America somewhere. It's really about finessing and finding a combination of search words that works for you. Because if I just typed in criminal justice overpopulation, it would have looked for those words either independent of one another, so all it had was the word criminal, or all it had was the word justice. This will work for criminal justice together. If it comes in a different order, it won't find it. So little inconsistencies to be aware of. And let's say that this person, Wooldredge, I think he has nothing right to say about this topic, and I keep finding articles about him. Every time I search, it's his name over and over again. I can add not Wooldredge, and we kick him out. The search function then removes anything that references his name from the search. And that may be articles he's written, or it may be articles that other people cited from him, or they just used the word Wooldredge randomly. This, I think, is what distinguishes the kind of Google search research from real academic in-depth searching. Because you really need to read abstracts and figure out what the people are saying, and this search function gets you to that quicker. Because instead of like wading through thousands and hundreds of thousands of random articles that use the word criminal justice, you get to narrow your search. There's also some more in-depth search filtering available on the Stockton library page. A lot of these are on the side here, or if we go back to the beginning here, we can hit this advanced search. And it does this Boolean thing for you in this advanced search too, if you want to do that. All in here, there are little boxes you can check and search terms you can choose or not choose, and that again helps narrow down your search options. I think someone from the library is much more knowledgeable about this system than I am, or probably ever will be. So if you have questions, use the help desk over there and ask around, because this could really get really complicated and in-depth with interlibrary loan or with different database access or physical books. All of that gets really complicated really quickly. But for this generic searching, I think you've got some great tools at your disposal, because you can search by like what discipline it's in, what type of content. So I think for me personally, I tend to look for books in the academic journals, in the database website. I look for books because I like the scanned versions, and I think I get direct to the source. But when I look for the title of a book, I get book reviews of that book before the actual book. So I've got like hundreds of pages of people talking about the book, but not it itself. You can select to omit book reviews, or you can omit newspaper articles or ebooks or anything like that. You can filter out anything from the architectural school or anything from business. Really, this is about finding the exact search term and categories that match your topic and get you the article that you need. With all of this, pay attention to the recency of the information. Last 5 years plus would be best, but it really depends what you're writing about, and who's writing it. Because if you know the person writing it is a super biased or super tough source to get really involved with, be careful. This goes over a bit of what I just said. Stockton database, search all the databases at once, use Boolean searching to your advantage, and use the filters to the best of your ability. They're super helpful, and the library help desk can give you a bit more information there too. So once you've got this information, where you've found your sources, you've highlighted quotes you want to use, it's perfect, everything's great. You need to now integrate it into the actual paper you're writing. This is important because, one, it gets you to back up your information with actual cited evidence, and you sound more credible as a writer, and two, it helps me know where you got your information from, so that if you end up sounding biased, or if I end up disagreeing with what you're saying, or if I just want to learn more about it, I know where to get it from. In citing, there are two things to pay attention to. One is the in-text citations, and that's a shorter little kind of shortcut to the longer reference page citation that takes me more in depth through the full information of the source. So it's kind of like one little shortcut that leads me to the longer one at the end. When you're making these in-text and reference page citations, you have a lot of resources at your disposal. One of them that I highly recommend is those little style guides. They're either called Rules for Writers or a Writer's Reference, or if you have the APA specific one, any of those little books that walk you through the citation style, so long as it's the most recent edition, are endlessly helpful. Because with we just saw the very different types of searching and articles you can find, it's impossible to memorize how to cite every single different type of source. There's 60-something different types of source citations in those books, and like citing an edited edition of a book is different than citing a reference of a book, is different than citing a website or an online journal. All of them are different from each other. So using these books or using these other resources to your advantage is a must if you're going to get any semblance of a real citation in. You could also use online resources like the Purdue Online Writing Lab, but I would recommend staying away from other online resources like the Citation Machine or BibMe or any of those bibliography generator sites. On one hand, it's like a moral argument that you should be doing the work yourself, but I think that one is one that doesn't really sell well with audiences. The one that I think people agree and listen to more is that it's easier to use the books and Purdue OWL than those citation generators. The citation generators often use outdated styles, or if they have the most recent style, it's a computer program and it gives up easily. So if you hit the URL into the citation maker and it spits you out something, and the date was in a weird place, or the author name was in like a weird text box and not the real document, and if all these weird little bits of information were in weird places or hard to find, the program gives up real easily. So it'll just say no date, or it'll skip the title and go right to the next piece of information in the site, and you've got a broken, non-helpful citation that doesn't do anything. It doesn't work. So really, if you go through one of these books, it will be easier, it will take less time, and you'll wind up with a more correct and APA style specific source at the end. And come to the Writing Center. I'll give that plug at the end too, but the Writing Center, all the tutors know APA, MLA, and Chicago. And we have tutors who know more specific styles for their disciplines, so really there's a ton of different areas of help you can get. For the in-text citations specifically, I'll go over those now. You're looking for 3 bits of information. Because APA is super into recent information, the in-text citation needs the year, but you also need the author's last name, and if it's a page source, you need the page number as well. All 3 of those bits of information are used whether you're offering a direct quote, which is their exact language, or if you're paraphrasing their information, which is when you're taking their information but using your language instead to describe it. Both of those things still need the in-text citation. And I think a lot of people get into a bit of a gray zone here over, well, it's my words really, but the information's from the source, or the only reason you would know what to say is because it's from the source. I would say when in doubt, use the in-text citation, but really you want to be being more careful with how you present the information in the language. If you find yourself kind of stuck between quoting or paraphrasing, that is, you've taken their exact language and swapped in a few of the words for synonyms, that counts as a type of plagiarism, because you're presenting most of their words as your words, and it's not quite the same as making a full paraphrase. So you want to be very careful there too. All right, so making these in text. The last name, the year, and the page number all should be there. Page number only if it's a page source. And they'll look like these two first examples. The first option is to list the author's name in the sentence leading up to it. This is called a signal phrase, and it lets the reader know what's going on, like who's talking, why do I know this information is being thrown at me. And then you follow it up immediately with parentheses around the year. After that, you give your words, whether it's a paraphrase or a direct quote, and if there's a page, you put it at the end. If not, you would just put the period after that Y in capacity. If there's no page, ignore that, end of the sentence earlier. That's the first and most common style. And I think this is often the strongest one because it helps you use those signal phrases. If you're not using signal phrases, it's hard for the reader to really realize what's happening if you've just kind of dropped a quote right in there and don't give me much context for it. The second style is the second bullet point, and that is to wait all the way till the end to put the bits of information. Blah, 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 whether it's a paraphrase or a quote, last name, comma, year, comma, page if there is one. Again, if there's no page, that parentheses would just end after 2004, and you put a period. This works for the last name of the author, the year of the source, and the page. If you've got a weird source that, instead of having an author, is going to have an organization name, or if you're using the title of the work because there is no author, or some other weird thing that the book has told you to do, because if you don't have information, you kind of shuffle things around. Whatever the first piece of the puzzle is on your references page citation should be what I see here. So if it's the last name, cool. If it's the title, cool. Organization, all good. This next one gives a bit of an example of that. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2016, quote, wait to put the page all the way at the end. Or with the same source, you could put it all the way at the end. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2016, page 1. I think this is where a lot of students will slip up because these are tough. It's hard to put bookends around the information that's directly from a source and what you've kind of pulled out of your own brain and your experiences. But this is really the type of thing that you really want to pay attention to. This is where plagiarism happens, right here in the trenches with these in-text citations. And most of the plagiarism at the university is accidental, or at least I like to think that. It helps me sleep, because they've incorrectly tagged the info. So they're kind of caught in this really big problem that either wasn't intended or was just an honest mistake. So pay attention to your style books, pay attention to the Purdue Online Writing Lab, pay attention to your tutors and your professor, because this is the really, really important part of your research. So you may be using the quotations in your paper and going kind of line by line, quote by quote, and you're having a great old time. One specific thing to look out for is if you're using a lot of quotes or really long quotes. Both of these could be problematic. You want to use resources to back up your claims and of course add important language to the text if you feel they've said something remarkably. But if you're using a lot of quotes or really long quotes, it can feel a bit like you're trying to fill space. And if that's a miscommunication, that you're not trying to fill space and you felt that these quotes were helpful or necessary, consider trimming them back. I think block quotes really should be limited in use because you want to explain the information that you've presented. If you've given me one line of quoted text with statistics in it, you need to spend some time discussing those quoted texts. You want to spend some time explaining what is going on here. When it's a block quote, that's such a long bit of information that you need to spend a ton of time just explaining that block quote because I need to know why you know that this is helpful. And I need to know why it's related to your topic at all. So with that in mind, I think I usually advocate against the block quote. But if you're determined, it's good to know the styles for it. There are a few little specific format things specific to block quotes that you need to know. The first is that when you're in the signal phrase, that is using the author's name leading up to the quote, you want to start with a colon after the signal phrase. You'll then bump the whole quote down a line and indent it in, so it's one big section by itself. You'll then give me your quote with no quotation marks, delete the quotation marks, cite it at the end like usual, and then put a period before the citation, whereas in a regular sentence it would go after. When you get back to your writing for your paragraph, you're starting back at the left with no tabbed indent. And I said a lot of words there, but here's what I mean. We're starting with a colon all the way at the start. We're tabbing the whole thing in like a big old section. We're including a period before the citation at the end of it. And then when we get back to our actual writing for the paragraph, we keep it all the way on the left. We don't indent that. Because if we indent that, it's like a new paragraph, and that's not what we're doing. So whether you're using the more traditional in-text citations, or when you're using these block quotations, it's important to keep in mind, again, the outline you're building and how it fits into your bigger picture. Some professors will call this the ICE model, what I'm about to say. Some call it the quotation sandwich. The idea is that the closer your quotes or your paraphrases or your cited material is to the center of a paragraph, typically the better. And that's just a rough rule of thumb, because you want some time above your quote or above your paraphrase to set up a situation where I know what you're talking about. Lead me into the topic for this paragraph, discuss it a bit, and then give me the cited information. After you've given me the citation, you now need to orient me back to your whole paper and explain why it matters. Explain afterwards what you mean. This introduce, cite, explain model gives a good kind of sandwich to your paragraph that really makes your paper feel more cohesive. I was saying earlier, when students come in asking if the paper flows or if it makes sense, this is an area where it doesn't, typically, because integrating sources is hard. It's difficult to really glue someone else's words into the same idea as yours. You've got to have a really good fit, or you've got to have a really finesse the language to make it match you. I have an example in this next bullet point, an article discussing role, minimum, blah, blah, blah. But the rough idea is that you want the quotation or the paraphrase to meld with your own writing. And I don't mean that it's going to be indistinguishable, because I'll see the citations. It'll be separate to some degree. But it needs to take part in the larger arc of the paragraph. It needs to be a real part of it. Otherwise, it'll just feel kind of stapled in there awkwardly, or kind of weirdly shoved in. And your goal as writers is to make the process as smooth and efficient as possible. Going forward, you need to use these styles in each of your paragraphs, get through your whole paper, all of it. You've done your intro, all your body paragraphs. If you have like methods and data, all of that's in there. You've done your outro. It's time for the references page. When you do this in the process, I think it is kind of up to you. If you do the references at the beginning, and then you can use them as you write, cool. If you wait all the way to the end to do them, it's a bit tougher because you need to be more careful with how you cited, but it's still doable. Things to look out for. In APA, you'll have the word references centered on the top of the page. In works cited, it's not works cited. In MLA, it's called works cited. In Chicago, it's called a bibliography. APA calls it a reference. So you'll have references up there at the center. And after that, you'll be using a hanging indent on each of your citations, which is the opposite of regular indent. Instead of the first line being like pushed in, it'll be everything but the first line pushed in. You'll alphabetize the whole list, and you'll be using your style guide to follow the format for each of the different sources. APA specific things that you would have no way knowing unless someone told you or you read the book. APA, when you're in the references page, when you're in the title of the work, capitalize only the first word, any proper nouns, or if it's a two-part title, like with a colon in the middle, the first part of the second section counts as a new first word. So first words, proper nouns, and if it's a two-part, the first or the second part. There's no way you would know that without just being told it, because it makes no logical sense, and like it's a really specific APA thing. But those little tiny rules are what govern the references page. So where you put commas, or whether you italicize, or whether you give something capital letters, are all really specific, and there's no way of memorizing every single one. So use your resources. Use the books, use the Writing Center, use the online Purdue OWL. Here, I'm going to go over the rough look of the page in general. Again, we're keeping that header at the top of the page. That'll be on every page. You have the references centered, and then you have the list of references. This may be 2, 3, 4. This may be 35, 40. It all depends on the scope of your paper. Try not to flood with too many sources if it's a short paper, and try not to be really barren with a few sources if it's a really long one. There's no real set guideline over how many sources you have, unless your professor tells you, in which case, do what the professor tells you. So now that the writing process is done for the paper and the references and all that, you've done your abstract at the end, everything is really complete. You need to kind of wrap up the paper somehow. You've got this stack of paper and you got to hand it in. But the process is not done, and I think that's what a lot of people get tripped up with. I think that there's a couple bullet points here that really help you focus in after you've written the paper, and before, because all of these are all up in the process. The first one is that you need to pay attention to your assignment sheet. The most heartbreaking thing at the Writing Center that I interact with day to day, I had to do this to the same student 3 times in a row after they had worked on an assignment, is that a lot of beautiful, wonderfully written assignments get zeros because they have nothing to do with what the question was. If you've looked at the assignment and really understand it well, and you know what you're trying to tackle, cool. If you've just kind of, oh yeah, it's a paper on whatever, I'll write it. If there's questions on the assignment sheet you had to answer, or specific things you had to do, and you missed it, that's points off your paper for no reason, because you really want to rein yourself in and write what you're supposed to be writing. And that has to happen before you start writing, as you're writing. I mean, like, whether you're a first-time freshman or a graduate student at the doctorate level, you need the assignment sheet. Secondly, I think that, especially if it's a really long paper, especially if you've got papers in other classes and midterms and finals, and it's a big, hectic pile of school, it's easy to get to the last word on your paper, just print it, staple it, toss it in. You're just done with it, get it out of my sight, I don't want to see it ever again. But no research paper, no article, no book is done on the first write. My boss, Pam Cross, who is a wonderful and tremendously smart person, is not done with things on the first pass through. You need to, with yourself, with a tutor, with a friend of yours, with anybody, look through the paper at least one more time, because you'll catch stupid typos or rules that you know you need to follow that you just missed at the time or forgot or something, and you won't catch them until you see it again. Something that I think is a helpful metaphor or image here is that I think in high school or in our first writing classes when we're young, we're taught that we need to get from point A to point B in a paper. We need to build a road that goes forward. And that means we're placing bricks or we're building sentences that eventually get us there. I think if students instead think of it like building a wall where each brick gets placed on top of each other, it's a tougher idea because the smaller pieces on the bottom build up to the top, but that doesn't mean you can't just switch them out. Getting from point A to point B lets you change the beginning without changing the end. It doesn't make the whole thing topple over if you change stuff at the start of your paper. It doesn't ruin your whole idea if you want to swap out a paragraph in the middle or something. So if you're building a path from point A to point B, I think of it like that way is more helpful. Okay? It's about taking what you've learned through all of your years of writing and kind of gluing it all together at once. As you're doing that, you need to read it over as many times as you can. And what I'm about to say sounds stupid, but if you read out loud, it can be helpful. Because if you're reading with your eyes, you quickly skip over words or you kind of jump and you remember writing it so you know what you roughly said. But if you carefully read each exact word, your ears pick it up. You see the weird grammar things you did. You see the missed commas if your actual ears hear it. And this last one is, I think, part of the human condition. You can't wait till the last minute. You can't procrastinate. And I know that's kind of everyone's told you that forever. And part of growing up for me, I always just assumed procrastinating stopped at a certain point. But coming to college, I know professors who I work with every day who procrastinate, who do like book proposals at the last second, who do their like grades at the last second. It's part of the human condition. I get that, but it's impossible for you to get a thorough reread of your paper. It's impossible for you to work with a tutor and get any real information and improve your paper if you've got like 15 minutes before it's handed in. if you're working on it the night before at 4 in the morning, you're not at your best. So procrastinating really hurts you in the long run. And I know that it's easy to be like, yeah, I know procrastinating sucks, but it does. And I think a lot of people come to the writing center with like a good 20 minutes left before the papers need to be handed in. And like, I guess like you could put a comma here or something, but if there's bigger changes that need to happen, you do not have the time to do anything substantive on the paper. And like, I can't hand miracles out to people and say, we can fix all the mistakes in the next 5 minutes. So you really need time to take the consideration of the tutor and to take the consideration of the reread and really put those fixes into effect. So those are my kind of preachy couple bullet points that I think I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give. Now here you get the kind of nitty-gritty push for the Writing Center. Writing Center is over in J105, which is, if you're walking towards N Wing, we're on the left. And we have hours at the main location, which is J105, from 9 to 6 most days. Fridays we close a little early, 4. We also have night tutors available at Library Learning Commons, which is directly to the right of that, that front first desk. So it's that big open room over there. Some in the TRLC. We have night tutors in Lakeside, and starting last semester, we now have tutors in Seaview. And all of those are from 6 to 9. So if you have like a paper to work on, or you need help building a thesis, whatever stage you are in the writing process, I think if you come during the day or at night to one of these locations, hook up with a tutor and really be ready to hear some criticism, because nobody's a perfect writer. I'm not. Far from it. Professors, people with like 3 different doctoral degrees are not perfect writers. It always helps to get a second eye on things. We always like to see people early in the semester because we get to see how you start as a writer and work on things as the semester builds. And we like to see people often. If you come just once, then we've done something wrong. We want you to come multiple times. We want you to work with the same tutor again, work with different tutors, see all sorts of different styles and angles of the process, because everyone has something unique and helpful they can provide to guide you in the right direction and help you get the A on the paper and improve your writing and do your best as students. Any last second questions? Any thoughts? I know it's a lot of information to kind of compress into your brain all at once. But this presentation will be available on Blackboard, and we're making this video, so you have a lot of different resources to keep drawing on this as the semester goes. Okay?